we are in the midst of a Twitter meltdown that's actually, I'm honestly quite confused by it. So someone, somewhere, can't decide whether Chris Jericho should have been murdered on live television or wrestling's just full of all us soy boys who want to just fall on feathered mattresses and do backflips. I believe that is the situation. But it seems not to be the case. So I don't know. We've all seen Blood and Guts. Chris Jericho fell off the cell or off the cage, whatever they want to call it, the War Games cage, onto a perfectly reasonably placed piece of padding that was caught on camera. Someone, somewhere in the world believes that he should have landed and exploded on concrete. This was then reported by everyone, but no one knows who said it. So first of all, Warren Hayes, was it you? And if it wasn't you, do you know who this was?
Look, I can't speak for my burner accounts, but I didn't do it.
It's
it's a weird. It's really one of those things where you feel like this just took it has a mind of its own, right? It just took off all by itself, and for some reason, if you didn't like the ending to Blood and Guts, then because you wanted Chris Jericho, 50-year-old Chris Jericho, to injure himself into a wheelchair kind of thing. No, I it's fascinating to me. I don't quite understand it.
I think I've got a theory, which is that particularly wrestling Twitter has become such a ravenous place for bad takes. We have now passed through the event horizon where Twitter is now reacting to the take before it has existed.
Mm-hmm.
That's my new theory on this.
It would make sense. It would make sense. That preemptive striking, essentially. Or maybe there's this collective idea where it's like, hey, if we crap on the idea before someone actually makes a thing out of it, then cross our fingers, maybe no one's going to write about it then. Maybe no one's going to bring up that idea. It's extremely fascinating, but because I think it's entirely justifiable to look at the ending of Blood and Guts and just say, you know what, this was not a satisfying ending. And even outside of the fall, it's not even the fall in and about itself that bothered me. It was the idea, why did we escape the cage in the first place? Why didn't Chris Jericho turn around and be like, hey, we've got a 5-on-4 advantage now. Let's end this match, kind of thing. Like, why did we feel this was necessary when I think there could have been perfectly wrestling based conclusions to come out of Blood and Guts without having to escape the cage? I just thought it fell flat. No pun intended. And it has nothing to do with the crash pads. I think the fact that the cameras really picked up well, the crash pad and the steel, the cardboard steel. I think the fact that it picked it up really, really well didn't necessarily help the suspension of disbelief part. But ultimately, it's like, of course, it's pro wrestling. It's gimmicks and smoke and mirrors. That's what pro wrestling is all about. So if it didn't look realistic, okay, well, they wasn't quite up to par. But other than that, it's like, I don't know what the big reaction, and I don't understand why it immediately equates to me wanting Chris Jericho to pull a Mick Foley.
Yeah, I think there's so many different sort of threads being pulled at the same time, where AEW had kind of worked themselves into the idea again that, there's this big spot coming at the end of a big show. You know what happened last time? That we're not going to mess it up this time. So I think there was a little bit of that where, so everyone was kind of preparing for what they were, how they were going to like. And obviously there's a lot of people who are sort of preloaded as to what they're going to think and say about anything. But I think it is I find it personally quite interesting. So when I'm not doing sort of fairly pointless wrestling shit posting on Twitter, I work in TV, and I find all the production stuff fascinating. And I think it's really interesting that it's the production side of it that sort of the only thing they really struggle with. And I would even put the Matt Hardy thing into that thing as well. That wasn't like, I don't even think that was really a wrestling mistake as much as it was a people around should have figured out a way of producing that in a way that made it easier to do on the night without having to take the risk or whatever. And I think this is like another example of that kind of teething issue. But obviously that all gets lost in the you want to see people get murdered on TV thing. Also, a guy did land on concrete. Darby Allin got like launched out some concrete stairs like a skateboarder.
Which so was my bloodlust was satiated at that point. I was happy.
Yeah. You were having a smoke. You were chilling. There was nothing wrong with, you were good. You had your fill of concrete.
I was fine. Chris Jericho can land on marshmallows at this point. I don't really mind. It's fine. No, that's a good point. And I mean, it even goes into, I think we can even ask ourselves, where is AEW best served, right? We point out the Matt Hardy thing, which is legitimate, but even think back to the exploding barbed wire death match, the conclusion to that, right? Didn't quite go off as they wanted. Maybe kind of like here. It seems like AEW might have a little hard time, struggling a little to get their more gimmicky matches over in a satisfying way, as opposed to letting two guys, two girls wrestle and do their thing without the artifice around it and just go at it. Because when they do that, that's where they're at their best. Just think of Kenny Omega and Rey Fenix at the beginning of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Think of Britt and Thunder Rosa. I mean, sure, that was a gimmick match per se, but it was still, there wasn't like they stuck to the basics is my point.
Yeah, they were working.
They were working, exactly. So you feel like, when they want to add in these moments, I don't know how to really define them, that have that go beyond the scope of the match and want to create like this event, like an explosion, like someone being thrown off a cage. It feels like are they struggling? Do they have a little difficulty with it? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's by doing stuff that you learn from your mistakes, right? But maybe they're just best served at this point to just be like, just stick to the basics, stick to what they're good at, which is putting on really, really good wrestling matches on a weekly basis.
Do you think, seeing how Twitter, and I don't want to, let's not sort of just start whacking off intellectually, but taking sort of the day as this, I've just found what's happened today and the fallout from it an interesting experiment into how wrestling Twitter reacts to these sorts of things. We'll call it that. How have you got any kind of, what's your sort of, I guess, assessment of how? I mean, even what's trending on Twitter now is it literally says Jericho, and then wrestling fans assess Jericho's performance. That's how it's actually written on the Twitter trending. So, how would you assess Twitter's reaction to that spot? Let's say.
That's a good question. I think Twitter reacted in the most natural Twitter way, I guess, would be my gut feeling about it. Just seeing a spot happen, and then then you kind of see the camps. I think there's a lot of this that just became a question of tribalism at this point, where you're like, well, you have the AEW people, the anti-AEW people who are like, well, look at this this problem that they had here. Look, you can see the padding. Oh, terrible promotion. What a bad production.
That is what they sound like.
Oh, that's what they sound like. Meanwhile, the AEW people are like, "Oh, but this was fantastic. You guys aren't focusing." Clearly, they sound the same, which is really strange.
The other guy sounded a bit more like the Cookie Monster than the previous guys, but
I think this sort of created an opportunity for people who live in this tribalism spectrum to just go at each other, because, like I said, I tweeted out, just simply that just because I didn't like the final, the end of the match, doesn't mean that I wanted Chris Jericho to die. But then people are like, "You psycho! What are you talking about? You're psychotic. Why would you want him to do that? He's 50 years old. You've never taken a bump." I'm saying, what's wrong? I'm just saying that I don't want him to get hurt, and I feel like a lot of people read tweets thinking that the people who compose them write them angrily. Like, I think there's always that the voice of Twitter is anger, rage. Whereas most of the time, and I'm not a perfect man, but most of the time,
your words, not mine.
Most of the time I will tweet very calmly, maybe, puzzled, a little reactionary, but seldom angry, seldom really raging. It's happened. Like I said, I'm not, but I think there's that situation as well, where everything feels like a confrontation, or people seem to take tweets as confrontations, right? So I think ultimately that's what the issue is you have camps, very, very clear camps in the minds of a lot of people. And when you tweet something against that person's camp, they feel piqued, you feel attacked, and they go after you, despite the fact that you're just like, no, this is just a feeling. It's an opinion. It's a statement. And you're entirely in it. You can hit the little heart and like it, or ignore it, or mute me, or block me. That's fine too.
I think when you think about, I mean, I think this is perhaps not true of some of the people you're talking about, but when I think of anger's actually quite, actual anger is actually quite a rare emotion to have in your day-to-day life.
Yes.
Generally speaking, real anger.
I'd agree with that. Yes.
And the frequency with which people seem to be able to discover it afresh every day, I find quite fascinating and quite interesting. How do you think there's a difference between Twitter and YouTube? I noticed when one of my screen grapples goes up on WrestleTalk's YouTube, the comments are very different than what they are. And obviously Twitter's kind of more people that already probably like it or follow me or whatever. But there is a real, I mean, I'm sort of infinitely pointing out to people all the time, but there is, I think, particularly within, I think the internet wrestling community, I do think does have a particular issue with this sort of thing, if that's a not too broad a way of putting it, whereby every moment is a new battle line being drawn in this sort of forever war over some sort of territory that is at best ill-defined. And I feel like today was one of those things where everyone was really ready for it. And then, because no one really did suggest that Jericho should be murdered, everyone kind of lost a bit of steam and got a bit confused, and then started trying to debunk each other. It's been entertaining, but it's been strange, I think, is where I've kind of landed on it.
And I think strange is a good qualifier, and I think you make a really good point, where it's where you wonder what's the end game for you as a Twitter user, or to go to the front lines and fight for something. I've chatted with people, I've very civilly debated with people about this, but others are just outright calling me a psycho. for some weird reason because they think that I want Jericho to die. But it's like you said, that like there's no land grab here. There's nothing that will benefit you in the short term to be on the attack for a company, and that's always something that strikes me very, very weirdly because I don't I don't stick up for corporations. I don't stick up for companies. Companies are out there to make money, and they will inevitably, always, at some point in history, they will disappoint you. Regardless of what the company is, they will do something that will challenge how you feel about them. And so to me, like sticking up for WWE, AEW, any corporation, multi-million dollar, in the case of WWE, $1 billion corporation, why would you stick up for them? Why would you go to bat for any company and stick your neck out for them? Talent is a whole other discussion. Talent, though, that's crucial. Those are the people you should be sticking up for. It's not a question of AEW or WWE. It's more like who are the people you like? Those are the people who are out there sticking their necks out every week so that they can make money, so that the company they work for can make money, so that they can continue to have a job. Those are the people that you should be defending. Those are where ultimately the battle line should be, because that's what matters. That's what draws you to the product, ultimately speaking. So, it's a weird. It's strange, and we see this everywhere, right? In gaming, Sony, Microsoft, like we see it in so many different in all areas of entertainment and consumerism. Brand loyalty is important for anything in marketing. It's crucial. It's super, super important. But at some point you just have to be able to have the disconnect between sticking up for a brand and sticking up for the people who are actually entertaining you. That's the main difference here.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think one of the so just to kind of bring this back to I guess Twitter specifically, it does seem as well that a statement might get made by someone, and this is, let's say it was like The Undertaker going on Joe Rogan and saying that wrestling got soft, right? So he says that, and you immediately see, like, you could see it happening. The split happened.
Mm-hmm.
You were either on the side of it's too soft, or you were like, bring back the knife fights. And there was no in between. And even like you did your video last week on Booker T, it's kind of like the old sports talk radio thing of like, I'm going to go in with this angle, and my angle for the top of this segment is AEW's doing nothing for Impact. And then half an hour goes by and you're still talking about it, and you've spun yourself into this really hot take that really quickly falls apart and is fairly,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fairly strange take, all things considered. But, and I think, and again, you can see there'll be people who just, you'll see the sort of falling on either side. I mean, I, for one, this is my personal bugbear, but the constant lionizing of the Attitude Era, I find personally frustrating. And how everything gets referenced back to the Attitude Era as if it was this like perfect moment in wrestling. And again, that's another one. You see that people are sort of, it's almost like the boomer thing. If you're on the other side, people can lob that at you as like, well, you're one of those people, and then some people are Jim Cornette, which is obviously, that's a problem in of itself. But so like, are there any widely held takes, I guess might be a way of saying it, that like you find particularly irritating, that you see people falling on either sides of very, very quickly? It's not a very well worded question, but it is a question.
That I do understand. Yeah, I mean, there's a few of them. I think I I think the kind of takes that irritate me most are the ones that come from people who haven't come up with that opinion themselves.
Oh, it's a secondhand take is the worst.
Yeah. And I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like everyone gets influenced by other podcasters. I myself listen to other podcasters, other shows, get their takes. And sometimes, I will clearly incorporate what they are advancing, because to me it makes a lot of sense. It's something I hadn't thought about, and like, oh, okay, well, this adds on to my take. But Jim Cornette is a very good example of someone who has these opinions, but then they trickle down onto other people, and you can tell that they take Jim's opinion and make it their own because of the verbiage they use. Right?
It's trickle down takeonomics.
Exactly. It's like when they talk, outlaw mud shows, cosplaying wrestlers, all those terms, those are Jim terms. They're Cornette terms. So whenever I hear even podcasters use them, or lots of folks on Twitter, I'm like, well, I know I know where you're getting this, and it's not necessarily an original thought. Then again, I don't want to sound presumptuous in saying that all my takes are original. They're, I share opinions with other people, and I differentiate with others, but I do have takes that resemble other people, other podcasters. Otherwise, there's always like-minded individuals. But if you come to challenge or argue, and what you're using is, like I said, verbiage that is clearly aped from someone else, that kind of stuff irritates me. That, and wrestlers who talk about mental health not being a real thing. Yeah, that's a big deal. That I think it's really frustrating, and a lot of them have. Ryback is one of them, right? Who hasn't been great with his takes on numerous things, but especially his mental health takes. And a lot of people saying, oh, you're feeling depressed today, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, go outside for a walk. And like, that's not how depression works.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what depression makes you want to do, kind of thing.
Well, luckily he's retired now officially, thanks to he got himself voted out of. I don't know what he got himself voted out of.
That had to be a work, right? That had to be a work. There was no way.
Someone said that to me, and I look back on it, and I cannot be convinced it wasn't totally serious.
That's the thing with the guy, right? It's like he's developed this persona about himself where he's so clueless about certain things where you're like, it seems plausible, but then the way he was doing, I'm in contact with people at Twitter, and I'm like, are you really?
I think, okay, this is how the bar would be, if he was doing a bit, it could only come from a sort of Kaufman-esque level comic mind. And there's no evidence previous to suggest he is at that level.
Okay, fair enough.
Therefore, I think he was doing it seriously.
That's the most compelling argument against the work theory I've heard this so far.
If not this, then what? Is my that's where I've gone. Thank you. I've never had a guest on before either, so I'm also sort of working this out on the fly, and I thank you very much for taking the time to be involved.
So I'm your first guest?
You are officially the first guest ever.
I'm honored. Thank you so much. That's really cool. I appreciate it. I hope it does work out for you then.
Thank you. I don't know why I sound like a threat.
This was a lot of fun. Good talk, man, and different from what I'm used to as well. So hey, we can do this again anytime.